Good morning. My name is Solomon Kleinman, and I'd like to thank you all for coming to the final briefing for the Preservation of Antibiotics for Medical Treatment Act. Before I begin, I would like to give a special thanks to my entire team for 2 amazing semesters worth of work, as well as to our faculty advisor, Dr. Matthew Palmer, for his continued support throughout this process. When penicillin was first developed, it was hailed as a miracle drug. It stopped infections and cured sickness. Since then, numerous antibiotics, such as erythromycin and amoxicillin, have been developed to battle everything from strep throat, pneumonia, to gonorrhea. Antibiotics have been a game changer, revolutionizing the world of public health. However, after 70 years, antibiotics are losing their effectiveness because bacteria are becoming resistant. And this has caused a growing concern. The World Health Organization says that antimicrobial resistance is becoming more dangerous. Urgent and consolidated efforts are needed to avoid regressing to a pre-antibiotic era. To address this, Congress has passed the Preservation of Antibiotics for Medical Treatment Act of 2011. Versions of this act have been brought before Congress every session since 2003, and while it's changed somewhat over time, its core has remained the same. That is to preserve the effectiveness of critically important antibiotics for human use by decreasing use in food-producing animals. This pie chart, to understand why decreasing use is important, we need to understand understand how much of our antibiotic arsenal is going to the animal agriculture sector. This pie chart shows antibiotic use throughout the US. The breakdown is that 20% are going to sick people, while 16% are going to sick animals. When we give antibiotics to sick people or sick animals, it's in high doses over a short time frame, specifically to cure illness. The remaining majority, that's 64%, that's all going to healthy animals. This is important because when antibiotics are given to healthy animals, they're administered in low doses in the feed or water over much of the animal's lifetime. This type of use allows the opportunity for resistance to flourish, creating concern for public health. So then, why are we giving antibiotics to healthy animals in the first place? Turns out that there are 2 reasons for this. The first is that antibiotics are used to prevent disease, which has allowed animals to be raised indoors at significantly higher densities and in greater numbers. The second is, is that when animals are raised on antibiotics, they actually gain more weight more quickly. Together, these have translated into more animals getting to market faster, which has vastly increased farm productivity and reduced the cost of producing and consuming meat. The Act focuses on decreasing use in food-producing animals because the amount of antibiotics used in animal agriculture and in the manner in which they are being administered. To do this, the Act has a number of mandatory components. They are a set of definitions and an enhancement to the safety review process. The definitions are critically important antimicrobial drugs, which refers to any antimicrobial that's in the same class as those used by people. The second is non-therapeutic use, which is the giving of antibiotics to healthy animals as a means of disease prevention or for growth promotion. The Act also adds a new safety criterion to the drug approval process, which states that all drugs must now prove that they will not cause harm to human health due to increasing resistance. It will also have a 2-year retroactive review component, by which point all previously approved drugs must meet these new standards or be removed from the market. These mandatory components of the Act clearly aim to reduce antibiotic use in animal agriculture, but how do we implement them? And in doing so, how do we guarantee a secure and affordable meat supply? For this, our team has developed a program starting with a focus on the mandatory components, the assistance to animal agriculture sector, surveillance and monitoring, and enforcement. However, for the remainder of this presentation, I'll be focusing on the mandatory components and the assistance actions during the first year. This is because the enhancement to safety standards and the support for animal agriculture is an important step to ensure that the program can mitigate the potentially negative effects that these regulations might have on the animal agriculture sector that was originally designed for reliance on high inputs of antibiotics. To begin, we have to look to the Federal Food and Drug Administration, as they have jurisdiction over all federal drug law. Within the FDA, the Center for Veterinary Medicine, the the Center for Veterinary Medicine regulates all animal drugs. To address the mandatory components, the CVM will gather an assembly of experts to draft new standards to protect public health, and then, through stakeholder involvement, hold mandatory public commentary periods, and bring in industry and NGO into the process. To do this, they will hire an associate director of new drug review and 4 assistants to facilitate the stakeholder process. The assembly is estimated to cost just over $38,000, while the administrative costs will be just under $378,000. The new standards will be drafted, reviewed, and ready for implementation by the end of year 1. The U.S. Department of Agriculture will take the lead to support the transition on farms away from intensive antibiotic use. Firstly, they will commission the National Research Council to create a best husbandry practices report for minimal antibiotic use on farms. They will also start a new grants program to go through the states to the land-grant university and cooperative extension programs to teach these new practices. The NRC report will cost $250,000, while the grants will be $50,000 per state, totaling $2.5 million. The grants and the report will be ready for distribution at the end of the first year. Next, the USDA will increase the budget for the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, which is the part of the USDA that supports and funds agricultural research. They will increase the budget by $100 million so that by year's end, they will have developed new grants for new husbandry techniques that will not require the non-therapeutic use of antibiotics. And lastly, these regulations will affect farmers and the pharmaceutical industry. To ease these burdens, the Division of Research, Education, and Economics within the USDA and the Office of Research within the CVM will each respectively be responsible for creating bring together a working group to create a incentives options reports for incentives options reports. We estimate that each of these will cost $250,000 to create, and by year's end, they will assess the available options to facilitate the transition of farming practices, as well as incentivize the creation of new antibiotics and antibiotic alternatives in animal agriculture, such as probiotics and vaccines. To recap our first year costs, setting the safety standards will come in at just over $416,000. The best practices guide for the NRC will be another $250,000. The largest part of our program is in the form of grants for education and for training. That's just over $102.5 million, and the 2 incentive reports will total $500,000. We've also included another $250,000 for coordinated administrative purposes, and that brings our first year total to just over $104 million. To gain a longer term perspective, we got to look back at all 4 of the program components. In the first year, safety standards will be set. Grants for training and research will go to farms, and incentive reports and best practice reports will be put together. For surveillance and monitoring, they will set their indicators and design audits, and enforcement will also set its criteria and assign responsibilities. 2 years and beyond, the retroactive review will come into effect, and all previously approved antimicrobials will now be subject to the new safety standards. Training will begin on farms, and any of the findings from the research or incentive reports will become available and be implemented into the agricultural sector. Surveillance and monitoring will be able to establish a baseline data for resistance in both people and on farms, and the enforcement will have data evaluation and take action when and where necessary. Even though this is a fairly comprehensive program, the Preservation of Antibiotics for Medical Treatment Act on its own will not, nor can it be, a quick fix solution. It is, however, a first step in ensuring public health. Thank you so much for your time, and do you have any questions? Man in the back, or man in the front.
Sorry.
Either way.
Hi, good morning.
I had a small question about, I see that in your proposal that you have a lot of grant making. Could you talk a little bit about how grants would be awarded and sort of what are the key criteria? I
can tell you that during the first year, a lot of our expenditures are going towards funding new grants for new research into husbandry techniques that will not require non-therapeutic use. I mean, that is the largest piece, as well as we're doing a grants program for the Land Grant University and Cooperative Extension Program. Those are the programs that train farmers as well as train students to be farmers. So we want them to get the best practices report that we're going to put together through the National Research Council and be able to implement those practices for minimizing antibiotic use and then phasing it out.
Hello. I'm wondering, so in the past there were similar bills that failed. Is there anything different about this one?
This one is a little bit more stripped down. I think also the fact that so much has happened in the last several years, dealing with antibiotics and antibiotic resistance. We hear about it in the news all the time, and I think it's just become a larger part of the American puzzle. Anyone else? Shoot. I mean, the beef, cattle, beef, pork, and poultry industries are about $150 billion industry. Put together, it's, yeah, they are not the most thrilled about this type of legislation. However, it's a public health concern, and it affects everybody. So I think that it's important that it goes through and that it continues.
The research on husbandry techniques, because there's beef raising that goes on without antibiotics, I believe, in this country already, and before the antibiotics were developed.
Now they call it traditional.
Yeah, so is the research more about scaling up and being able to meet the same demand?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, not all organic right now doesn't use antibiotics at all. This act does not call for the elimination of antibiotics completely, just for the non-therapeutic use. So figuring out the best way to scale up that process and make it applicable for and profitable for farmers, and as well as not hurting consumers.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.